Welcome to the Seed World Pro podcast, where seed industry professionals get the knowledge, tools, and peer support they need to grow their businesses and careers. Today, guest host Julie Deering will be interviewing Pete Hammett and discussing how you can amp up your company culture.
Today, I'm joined by Pete Hammett, and he's going to share a lot with you today. But you'll also note this is not our traditional webinar. We're not going to be going through PowerPoint presentations. This is a conversation with Pete, and we're going to be breaking down culture in a way that is fun and easy and inspiring. So you're probably here for one of three reasons. The first is you've paid for a pro membership or you're testing it out and you want to make sure you're getting your money's worth. The second is you want to better your business. And the third reason is that you want to better yourself as a manager and as a leader to move up the ranks. So today you're going to get all three and more. Pete is going to share with you why culture is so important to your business, but also how it impacts your personal brand. So most of the time when people hear culture, they think that it's boring and it's intangible and hard to grasp. And, and how does it really impact my ROI? I think it is a big question that a lot of people have. The mindset is we've got to create, we've got to produce, we've got to sell. Those are the things that bring home the money. Well, culture is something that companies are spending nearly $750 million on annually. And so it's very important people understand that it's core and centric to their business. So we're going to dig into that today. And when we leave or when we get done, you're going to be provided a worksheet that is kind of a synopsis of what we go over today. But there's also some actionable steps that you can take and you can begin your own culture journey on and actually implement in your business. So in case you don't know Pete, let me give a quick little introduction. Pete has more than 25 years in the talent management business, and he is also a core contributor to the programming done by Purdue University Center for Food and Agricultural Business. He's the owner of Hammett Consulting, and he's also recently released the book Organizational Proctology, which I think is so much fun. So, but he's worked for the likes of American Express and technology companies, and I think even had a part in spacesuits. So I'm not very good at connecting the dots there, but a long career and great insight and understanding as to how companies do or do not operate and different organizational structures and how those play out. So Pete, thanks so much for joining us here today. Let's go ahead and dive right into the topic of culture. So why is it so important that companies are spending almost $1 billion annually? And why is it so seemingly hard to grasp?
Well, that's great. Thank you, Julie, for that introduction. And so I love the way Julie has coached me. We're going to do this like a conversation. So what I'll do is I'll just share with you my background and my experiences and some of the things that I've encountered as I've gone through different culture journeys. And then if you guys have questions or if you have a thought or something you want to contribute, please just chime in, and then Julie will help us navigate this discussion back and forth. So we have about an hour, and let's just use that hour to just kind of exchange thoughts and ideas. So let's go back to where we think about culture and why culture is really, really important. And maybe the best thing to do would be to share with you my first early experience understanding the power and the importance of culture. So as Julie said, my career is kind of crazy. I don't think anybody would map it out the way it's been done, but this is the way it's kind of folded. The early part of my career, I was a software engineer in the space program. I worked for the organization that makes spacesuits. And so I was responsible for designing the software that decided what spacesuits went on, what astronauts. In that time, I was with this organization, ILC, for about 12 years. This was my very first powerful experience about the what culture can really mean came here. I was in the space program when we lost Challenger, and some of the employees that worked in my organization watched some of the kids of the astronauts that we lost while their spouses went to Kennedy. I was in Morton Thiokol a few months after we lost the orbiter, and we began to understand all the things that had occurred. But it wasn't until much later that I began to understand how culture played into that event. And NASA itself recognized that its culture had evolved to a place where people weren't able to speak up and ask questions, and those questions get honest airtime. And so while there were indications and questions being asked, the culture pushed those down. And NASA went on a journey to recapture a culture that would allow good questions to come up and people to answer them. But over time, uh, the inertia pulled them back to the same old way of doing things. And several years later, we had the Columbia incident. And while the science behind the incident is different, the culture was, again, very similar. There were questions that needed to be asked and questions that were being pondered, but not really addressed and answered. And then we lost another crew. So for me, those experiences really helped shape for me why culture is so important and why it sits at the center of everything that we talk about in terms of leading an organization and managing people. So I'll say this one thought real quick. When we think about culture, and here's a great sort of visual, we see culture as sitting in the very heart of what we talk about when we talk about managing talent. Culture is at the middle. Culture isn't a thing, culture is the thing. It is the thing that will influence our talent strategy and the way we go after defining talent, how we go about getting people in our organization. Culture has a remarkable influence on the way we think about performance and how we measure that and manage that, as well as learning and developing. I would say that when we talk about culture, what we're really talking about is engagement. And when we measure culture, we're measuring the engagement of our workforce. Engagement is really there's probably a million different definitions of engagement, but I like the definition that says engagement is the measure of people's full commitment to what the organization is doing, where their intent to be committed and their intent to put their discretionary effort at play really shines brightly. And of course, at the last little bit is succession planning. So that's basically our talent management framework. As we continue down the road, some of our other talent conversations, this framework will sort of guide everything for us. But culture sits at the center. So I would ask this question to most people, or I make this statement. The culture your organization has right now is ideally structured to generate the results you're currently getting. The results that your organization is achieving right now is directly connected to the culture that you have. So if you're really tickled with everything that your organization is doing right now, if you're achieving all the results you want and ever hope to achieve, if your employees are as engaged as you could possibly imagine, then you most likely don't need to do anything with your culture. But if your organization is looking to grow and advance and develop to achieve even stronger and more remarkable results, your culture is going to need to evolve and adapt to that. And how that culture evolves and adapts is critical. We say this, that every organization has a culture. It may be formal and intentional, and people are planful in describing and defining that, or the culture is just kind of growing up. So I'm going to share with you a few of my learnings over the last several years. So when I left the space program, I went to work for American Express. I would say that probably one of the most formidable times of my life. Amex is a remarkable organization. They commit a phenomenal amount of resources in developing their people. Their culture is strong and brilliant. They're not without challenges like anybody else, but a lot of things around culture and leadership I learned there. When I left American Express, then I worked for an organization called the Center for Creative Leadership, CCL. For those who know it, CCL is the premier organization for leadership development worldwide. They train more than 23,000, 25,000 people worldwide on what it means to be a leader. And I was working on my doctorate in leadership. I sat right beside the largest library in the country dedicated just to the practice and science of leadership development. But for the last 10 years, I was the head of HR for a large energy firm in Oklahoma. And we had this 10-year journey, and the journey is continuing because thinking about culture, it's not an initiative. It's a way of thinking, it's a way of being. It never stops, right? And so we talk about this in terms of what does culture look like. And so let's, Julie, if you could bring up that next slide on culture, let me just speak a little bit about how we define what we talk about culture. We say first and foremost, I define culture as this. Culture is what a group of people believe and how those beliefs influence the way they behave. It's what we think and how we act. We could go to several of the universities in the country, pull out all their culture books, stack them in our home, up to the ceiling, out the door. And if we distilled all of those books on culture, the bottom line is culture is what a group of people think, and how they think influences the way they behave. So let me give you a great example. I was traveling last week, had to rent a car, and I was struck by the culture that the rental car companies have created for those of us who rent their cars, because we have a couple of beliefs around renting a car. The first belief, and they really drill it into you, is if you return the car less than full of gas, you're going to pay an unreasonable price for gasoline. That belief creates an action, one of two actions. One action is we make sure that we stop before we turn the car back in to fill it up gas, because we don't want to pay 3-4 times the going price of gas to get it full. The other belief that happens is they will ask you to buy a full tank of gas so that you don't have to pay to do that, which then creates another action. And I've known people who have intentionally driven around the airport or taken trips unnecessary so they can burn that gas down until the light comes on. So the rental car company has created this little microculture around a belief that you doggone well better not turn that car in with less than a full tank. But the other belief that they've unintentionally created is the rental car companies really don't care if you turn the car in a bit messy. So most of us really could care less if there's McDonald's bags in the back, or if our French fries are on the floor, or if we've gotten mud in the car, because the culture, the rental car companies don't seem to care about that. Those beliefs, they don't care if it's dirty, but they do care if there's no gas in the car, have driven an action on our part to either treat the car messy or make sure that we fill it back in. So here's how culture works. The experiences that we have, like renting a car, drive the belief. The experience is if we don't turn it back in full, we're going to pay a lot. It drives the belief we better make sure we have gas in the car, which drives the action. I'm going to make it a point to get gas before I turn it back in. The experiences that we have drive the beliefs that we hold. Those beliefs that we hold influence the actions that we take. And then those actions then eventually lead the results. And you can see in the model that we have, and then those results in and of themselves are an experience. And it just keeps going and going and going. So if you want to get something different, let's just say, for example, in my organization, I'm not achieving certain results around making sales numbers. That's an action, or that's a result. I'm not hitting my sales numbers. So typically what I do is I go to the action. I go to the salespeople and say, make more calls, press harder. Do you understand what the product's all about? Can you get people more excited about buying this thing? Really what I need to think about is, before the actions, are the beliefs that people hold. What are the beliefs that my sales team holds around the products that they're selling? What are the beliefs my sales team holds around the people that they're selling to? What are the beliefs my sales team holds perhaps around what the competition is doing? and how they position against us. Those beliefs are driving the way that they approach the sales cycle. So if I need them to do something different in the sales cycle, maybe I need to think about different beliefs that they hold. If I want my sales team to hold a different belief around our product offering, then I need to create a different experience. And that experience will drive a different belief. So let's make it real. In the organization that I was in the energy organization, safety is a really big part of our culture. It has to be, because the work is incredibly dangerous. Initially, 10 years ago, there was a belief that accidents happen. We try very hard to make sure everything is safe, but an accident is eventually going to happen. When people hold a belief that accidents happen, accidents happen. And so we said we need to hold a different belief because we're having too many accidents, too many incidents. And so we went way out and we said, we're going to hold this belief that every accident is preventable, that every incident is something that we can prevent. And it took a long time for the organization to grab that belief. But think about it this way. If you have a belief that accidents happen, then accidents happen. If you have a belief that every accident is preventable, then you're going to have fewer accidents. And the way we said it was this: just holding a belief that all accidents are preventable will in and of itself not guarantee no accidents. But holding a belief that accidents happen will absolutely guarantee that we have more accidents than anybody wants. So we think about it this way. We want to have everybody hold a belief that accidents are preventable. Every incident is preventable. Now, what are the experiences that we need to create that will drive that belief, that will get people to sit back and say, I really, really am on board with that, and move it forward? So let me just pause just for a second and see if there are any thoughts. Julie, we have any thoughts or questions coming from the group?
Sorry, I had my microphone off. One of the pieces that has come in here is understanding how beliefs play into culture, and why that is not why that's not necessarily apparent.
That's a brilliant question. I think part of the reason is that we're really oftentimes focused on managing the organization. And so, Julie, would you bring that slide, that culture slide, up again? Let me speak
Sure.
to that, because that really helps answer this really good question for us. So what we think about is the difference between managing and leading. Managing is about the bottom part of this slide. Management is about actions and results. We think about managing. We think about the actions that we're watching over and driving the results that we need. And so the reason that we don't often think about beliefs and experiences is beliefs and experiences is where leadership plays in. And sometimes we're so focused on managing the business and managing the results, we're not pausing and thinking about leading the organization to where we want it to be. Leading is about creating experiences and driving beliefs. Again, if I'm not achieving the results I want, almost all the time I'm going to go back and start looking at the actions. I need to do something different. I need to do this different, or do this another way, or get these other people, or think about this other opportunity, or maybe adjust my results. And those are all the aspect of managing. But the leading piece is saying, what are the beliefs that drive people to behave the way they behave? If think about it in family terms. If you have kids who are taking certain actions and doing certain things, and you go, that's really not healthy, or that's not going to be the best for them in the long term, we typically just go to the kids and say, stop doing that or start doing this. And that's fine. That's what we do when we raise our kids. When we think about parenting our kids, what we're really doing is coming in and trying to understand, what are the beliefs, what are the thoughts, what's motivating my child to want to think that that's a better thing to do. Hold that belief is somehow they've gotten this experience. It may be something I've done, or it may be something that they've picked up from their friends. Here's a great example. When you start teaching your kids how to drive, which is like the most scariest thing in the whole wide world, one of the things that you're mindful of is that they're paying attention to how you drive. And the experience that they have in watching you drive creates a belief for them that that's the way they should drive. So you're driving and maybe you just drive with one hand on the wheel, or you're driving and maybe you don't always use your turn signal, or you don't always come to a complete stop. When your kids get to the place where they're going to start driving, they are watching you. That's an experience that drives a belief for them. That's the way they ought to drive. And when you're teaching them, you're kind of saying, no, 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 you need to come to a complete stop. And if you're had the experience I had, first thing you hear out of your kids is, well, that's not how you do it. Or when you're driving and they're with you, they will say, Dad, you didn't use your turn signal on that. Or, Dad, I'm not quite sure that hand gesture is one that I saw in the driver's ed manual. So maybe you should probably not do that. And so the reason that we think about that and the reason that beliefs are often not focused on is we don't understand how the beliefs really drive the actions, how those beliefs really influence the way people behave. And the reason and the people their actions drive the results we're getting. And so we're almost always focused on actions and results because that's what we focus on. But we have to come back and say it's the beliefs. That's why people are doing what they're doing. That's why our kids are doing what they're doing. That's why I do what I do. And if I want to change a belief, then I have to go back to the experience. I'll give you a real example. I ran the HR group. We had about 50 so folks in our organization. One of the things that we did is we did a lot of development. We focused on developing people in the organization. And the HR group said, we feel like the shoemaker's children, we don't get any development while we're spending time developing everybody else. I said, that's great. Thanks for letting me know. Let's spend time doing that. Over the course of several months, then I began to get some development opportunities for the group. I would bring the head of finance in to talk about what was going on, or the head of regulatory in to come in and talk about what's going on, or I get we'd run a half a day program on something or another, and we just did it. I just did that, and then when it came time to ask everybody again how they feel about their development, the numbers were still low, and I thought, great googly moogly, we've been spending all this time doing these things, and I asked everybody. I said, I don't understand. And go, well, we still don't feel like, we haven't had any development. I said, well, what about when the head of finance came in, or what about when the regulatory person came in? And they go, well, we just didn't really see that as development. That was on me. I didn't explain what we were doing and why. In our technical term, we say we need to interpret the experience for them. So the way I started doing it was I brought in the head of our power plants. I said, Donnie's here to talk to us about what's going on in the power plants. The reason I'm doing this is in your request to see more development. This is an opportunity for us to develop a better understanding of what's going on out in the field. And Donnie's going to spend a couple hours with us talking about that. I interpret the experience. The reason this is development, and we're doing this development because you've asked for it, and this expert here is going to spend a couple hours with us. Then when it came time to ask once more, how do you feel about development? The numbers had changed significantly. Oftentimes, we need to interpret the experience to drive the belief we want to do this. The reason I'm doing this is I want you to hold a belief, da, 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 da. So we wanted to build a belief in our organization that every boss is a partner with their employee on helping them grow and develop. That's a belief we wanted every employee to have. And so we taught the bosses on how to have those kind of development conversations and interactions. And at the very beginning of every one, the boss would say, the reason we're doing this is I want you to hold a belief that I'm your partner in helping you grow and develop. You own it, but I'm your partner. You don't have to do it by yourself. I'm here for you. And then once we interpreted that experience and moved that forward, that then drove people's perception of, hey, I do have a boss who's interested in helping me grow and develop. Let me share with you another real quick story, and then we'll ask for more questions. Every year we would run an annual company outing, and we typically scheduled it around when the state fair was going on, and employees and their families could go. And we had one particular year where finances were a little bit tight, and it was, maybe what we'll do is just pay the employee ticket and let the employees go ahead and buy their own tickets for their own family. And there was a lot of debate about that. And the question that we came down to that was asked was, what belief do we want our employees to hold around this event, around this experience, around who we are? And we didn't have to struggle. We knew we want our workforce to hold a belief that we're family, and that family is number one and most important. Once we reminded ourselves that that was the belief we wanted people to hold, the answer to, do we buy tickets for family, was easy. Of course we do, because that is an experience we want to reinforce. Family is important, and spending time with your family is important. And that belief helped us reaffirm an experience that we had been doing years over years over years. So again, think about it this way. Well, let me stop just for a minute and see if there's any other questions. Sorry, Julie's supposed to keep me on track here because I can go all over the place.
No, you're doing good. So I was going to ask, what are some of those most corrosive cultures that are out there, and some of those maybe common beliefs, and how does one go about changing that?
Yeah, gosh, that's a hard question. It's hard for a number of reasons. So the first question is, what are the most corrosive? What are the hardest? And that was the genesis behind the book I just wrote. Again, organizational proctology, and the subtitle is Field Notes for Dealing with Asshats in the Workplace. And so I asked the question, how many people have ever worked with or for a really bad boss, or someone that you care about a lot has had to work for a really bad boss, or a coworker, really bad boss or coworker? And every time I talk about this, just about everybody in the room raises their hands. And so here's one of those corrosive things that we see in the workforce, Julie, is really, really bad bosses who just don't understand how important people are and use people as cannon fodder for their own designs, their own career, their own advancement. And so the Society for HR Management just kind of put out their most recent workforce culture and results. And one of the things they say is, I'm going to guess at the numbers, but I think it's like 5 out of 10 people leave an organization because their culture is unhealthy. And that result, so half the people who leave because the culture stinks. And that is directly correlated with, and part of the reason, or a big part of the reason culture stinks, is my boss is a jerk, or other words that they use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is probably one of the single greatest problems within a culture, is really, really bad leaders. And the organization isn't being clear and definitive on what it means to be a leader in their organization and how they grow and develop really good leaders, and identifying where the poor toxic leaders are occurring and working that to either be better or not to be part of the company. The number one issue that we find in poor cultures is poor leadership. It's absolutely toxic leadership is the number one corrosive factor inside company cultures. The second one is just this results at all cost type of mentality, which then gets people to say and do things that are unethical, immoral, illegal, that kind of thing. But the number one is just really, really poor leadership. That's the one that creates the worst environments within organizations, the most toxicity. As head of HR, I can tell you flat out, the number one culture issue that we had to deal with was poor leaders.
So how do you identify those? I mean, to leaders above leaders, those leaders might seem great, but under those leaders, when you get into some of those hierarchies, how do you get that transparency that maybe you need to identify that?
Yes. So, man, that's such a involved question. So here's the thing: the corporate grapevine is the most brilliant communication mechanism in the entire world. We may not know what our current sales numbers are, but we absolutely know who the jerks are, and we also know who's fooling around with who in the workplace. We know those things. It's just out there. So any leader in the organization that's in the higher levels who wants to know who are the really good leaders and who are the leaders who aren't doing such a good job, that is not a hard question to figure out. There's all kinds of formal and informal ways to do that. Informal, honest to goodness, just go talk to the folks in HR and make sure the folks in HR know they're not going to get in trouble for saying it. Just tell me who's really doing a good job and tell me who's maybe not firing on all cylinders. The other way to know is when people are leaving. So again, I'm going to go down a rabbit trail real quick. When we ask people who are leaving why you're leaving, they never tell you why, because they don't want to burn bridges. So we don't ask people who are leaving why they're leaving. We ask their coworkers, why did Pete leave? Because their coworkers know, and the coworkers will tell you. Well, Pete left because his boss is a big fat jerk. Pete's not going to say that because he doesn't want to burn any bridges and that kind of thing, but the coworkers will tell you. There are all kinds of ways of knowing where the poor leaders are. One, there's formal, informal ways of doing it. Culture surveys, engagement surveys can do that. We can track those down to the individual leader. But the most important thing an organization can do is be intentional on defining, here's the leadership that we aspire to. Here's what leaders are, and here's what leaders do. And if you want to be in our organization, if you want to be a leader, this is what it looks like. And then lead by example. Be the kind of leader you want everybody else to emulate. And the way that we taught this is we said, be the kind of leader you hope your kids have when they start working. Right?
When we had talked earlier, part of our conversation was that you can learn a lot from bad bosses about the type of leader that you don't want to be.
That is exactly true. When we ask people what's one of the most meaningful experiences you've had as far as leading, they inevitably come back to their boss, and it's either I learned what not to do because I saw this boss, how they treated us, or I was the fortunate one that had this like unbelievably great boss. And so we say the characteristics of an unbelievably great boss is a person who cares more about you than they care about themselves, and a person that you can absolutely trust. They have your back. And if a boss has those two characteristics, you're going to have a really great experience. If the boss is somebody who's really in it for them and you couldn't trust them as far as you could throw them, it's going to be a bad experience. And regrettably, I coined this phrase called ARS, asshole related stress, and it's around dealing with, I shouldn't say that on, but it's about dealing with people who are just awful, and that creates this toxic culture from the highest levels in the organization to the bottom. And so how do you deal with that? And so Julie, your first question is, how do we know? If you're in a leadership role, senior leadership role, trust me, and for those senior leaders who go, well, I just didn't know, I would call baloney on that. I would say, no, you do know. And if you don't know, shame on you. That's your job. You should know what the leadership culture in your organization is just as much as you should know what your sales numbers are, or your preventative maintenance, or your inventory, or all those other things. Knowing the culture of your organization is as important, or more important even, than all those other financial metrics. So are you measuring culture on a regular basis? Are you spending time understanding who are my really top drawer leaders, and not just leaders who are achieving remarkable results? Trust me, that's important, and you have to get that. It's kind of table stakes. If you're not achieving results, then there's other issues we have to speak to. But who are the leaders who people want to follow, and hold those up as examples? And who are the leaders that people are quitting on or leaving, or having workplace health issues because their boss is such a nut?
Yeah. One of the things that you had kind of originally said was that, if somebody's new is coming in and there's been an old culture, and then getting the culture that you want, can you provide an example of when you've done that, and maybe how simple some of these actions can be
Yes.
to implement to create that belief and that experience.
Yeah. So sometimes these cultural beliefs kind of surface and you don't even know it. And then when you find out about it, you go, man, I'm just heartbroken. I didn't realize that. So I'll go back to my American Express days. When I left Amex, I was their VP of Operations and Technology. And my time with Amex included several relocations, moved from here to here to here to here. I remember moving to North Carolina from Florida. And my first few days there, the organization had a in-house cafeteria, and so I went and grabbed lunch and just sat down with some people that I didn't know, so I could get to know them. And we just began chatting and da 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 da. And they said, "Well, you're new, so who are you?" And I said, "Well, my name is Pete, and I'm the VP of blah blah blah." Man, the whole table just shut up. It was like, "What happened? What'd I say?" And they all looked at me real kind of like, uh-oh. And one brave soul finally just said sheepishly, Mr. Hammett, this isn't where the VPs sit. The VPs sit over there at that table that's really kind of nice. That's where all the executives go. And I was like, no way, no. Are you? I'll go, oh yeah. And also the VPs have their own parking place. It's not marked out, but everybody knows this is where the VPs park. And I said, that is ridiculous. So I went to my colleagues and I said, did you know that everybody believes that we all sit together and eat together and we all have our own little parking place? A few of them knew, but someone was like, that can't be true. I said, well, it is. And how'd that happen? Well, it just kind of happened over time, right? And so, okay, that is not the belief we want people to hold. So finally, we told the VPs, you know what? When you get here, no matter what time of day it is, you park the furthest away from the building you can possibly park. And because most of you could use the exercise anyway, right? And and when you eat, don't sit together like a little clique in high school. Get off your butt and go sit with people you don't know and talk to them and make sure they know who you are and it's okay to do that. When I went into the power company, I remember a guy telling me, I said, so tell me what it's like to work here. And he goes, well, our general rule is don't speak up until you're at the highest level you ever hope to be. And once you've achieved the highest level you ever hope to be, then say whatever's on your mind. But once you do, you're limited, right? They're going to shut you off. You're not going to be able. So there was a belief you couldn't speak up. Now the new chairman, CEO, did not. That wasn't his thing, but he inherited that from years and years and years of old stuff. Culture permeates an organization. You can hold a belief even if you haven't had the experience. So I'll give you this great story. I'm looking at my time. Okay, great story. This is awesome. So researchers take some monkeys and they put them in a cage. And in the cage, they put a ladder. And at the top of the ladder, they put a banana. And monkeys are a lot like humans. So monkey snuck up the ladder and kind of hoarded the banana and was eating it up there. And while he was doing that, the researchers squirt all the other monkeys with cold water. Monkeys hate that, by the way. They just can't stand it. And so they're screaming and yelling and cussing, and the monkey at the top's laughing, and everybody's laughing except the cold monkeys. So everything kind of dries off a little bit. They do it again, and another monkey sneaks up, and they squirt everybody. And then over time, the monkeys kind of catch them, and go, hey, hey, then we ain't doing it anymore because we don't like that. So all right, all right. We take one monkey out, and we put a brand new monkey in, and when nobody's looking, we sneak a banana up there. Well, the other monkeys see it. They're not doing anything. The new monkey sees it. He goes for the ladder and starts going for the banana. What do you think happens? All the other monkeys grab this new monkey and beat the monkey crap out of him. I mean, it was like somebody needs to save this monkey. They just could not. That monkey was not going, and it's like, yeah, everybody laughs except the monkey who's getting beat up, right? And they go, okay. So over time, they've switched out, and there's nothing but brand new monkeys. No monkey's ever been squirted with water. They put a banana up there, and no monkey goes for it. In that little monkey culture is a belief somehow, some way, that going after that banana is not a good idea. And if you hear the monkeys talking, and if you could interpret it, this is what I think they'd be saying. So, you know what? Why don't we go after that banana? Man, you don't want to do that. There was one monkey went after that banana, and it was awful. He went up, fell down, broke his head. right? And another monkey goes, that's not what happened. One monkey went up there and we've never seen him again. He's like disappeared, right? That's the way it happens in an organization. I don't even have to had the experience of being squirted with water. I just hang around other people who go, don't say anything, because if you speak up, you're in a pickle. And I go, okay, you don't tell me twice. That culture permeates, and you don't even have to have the experience. So here's the thing. The question is, how do we create a culture to create a brand new belief? If people hold a belief, so again, going back to a senior leader in an organization really high up there, people held a belief that if you voiced an opinion that was different than theirs, they would bite your head off. And so I'm working with this person and I'm saying, this is what people believe. Well, that's not true. I say, you're doing it to me right now. I'm telling you something you don't want to hear and you're biting my freaking head off. He goes, oh gosh, I am. I said, so here's what we're going to do. We'll have this meeting with all your direct reports. You'll make some statements and I'm going to chime in and I'm going to say something that's totally opposite of what you just said. And I'm really going to hold my ground. And then everybody's going to go, oh, it's been nice knowing Pete, right? And then you're going to say, well, that's not my point of view, but I appreciate that you have it. And that'll be it. And so we did it. And it was like, huh, okay, Pete didn't die. Let me express a view, right? And that kind of created the beginning of it. But we had to pull the guy back and say, look, that just can't be a role play. You got to genuinely create that experience. You got to say, I welcome different points of view. And even if I push back and maybe I'll do it aggressively, that doesn't mean we're not okay. A difference of opinion does not mean a difference of principle. And we all have the same principle. We're all moving in the same direction. So we have to be, if somebody holds a strongly held belief, it will take a lot of work to get them to move off that belief. And then if we had time, we would go through it. There's three categories of belief. There are firmly held familiar beliefs that are part of our family upbringing. So our religious persuasion is a firmly held belief. It would take a heavenly act to get somebody to have a different point of view. That's one. Then there are strongly held cultural beliefs that are from experiences, some good and some bad. Those will require an awful lot of intentional work to create new experiences, interpret those experiences, get people to hold a new belief. And then the final one are just loosely held beliefs. I believe that the newspaper that comes every day is really a waste of time. Maybe somebody can convince me otherwise, but that's kind of my loosely held belief. So that goes back to the question that everybody's kind of talking about here is, why don't we talk about beliefs? The reason we don't talk about beliefs is we spend a lot of time managing, which is around actions and results. If we could spend a little bit more time leading, which is thinking about what are the beliefs that people hold that cause them to behave the way they do or take the actions they do. And if I want different actions, what's the new belief that they need to hold? And then how do I create an experience that drives that new belief? Here's a great example, then I'll shut up for a minute. When people post for a new job, do they tell their boss that they're posting for a new job? No, I don't tell my boss, because if my boss knows I'm looking for a new job, they're going to hate me. And if I don't get the new job, my life's going to be miserable. Well, how do we get them to hold a different belief? Get their boss to work with them to help them say, look, Pete, you're looking for something different. Let me help you. What are you working on? I want to go here. Well, I happen to know the person working over there. Let me go tell them what a great person you are, and maybe that'll help get the wheels moving for you. Now there's a new belief or a new experience, new belief that maybe I can tell my boss that I'm looking for a new job inside the company, right? And so that's okay. I could go on and on.
No, that's really interesting. And so I do think it's about time that we begin to wrap up. And so I love the insight that you have provided and the examples. I think, very much practical and grounded in real world events and happenings, and something that we can all obviously relate to. What would be your one if you could give one piece of advice when it comes to culture, what would that be?
Yeah. Be intentional on defining the culture you want. Ask yourself this question. What do people believe about our company, about our culture? What do people say about us? So let's say I work for Joe's Bank and Storm Door, right? What do people say about Joe's Bank and Storm Door? What do our customers say? What do our stakeholders say? What do our employees say? Ask that question. And then ask the question, what do I want them to say? And see where those two land, right? And then think about how you close a gap between what people are saying and what you want them to say. Be intentional about defining the culture you want inside your organization as it relates to your customers, your stakeholders, shareholders, your employees. Here's how I want people to see my company. And here are the beliefs that I want them to hold. And here are the experiences that I'm going to create that will drive those beliefs. Because if you're not intentional, if you don't put that down, if it's not written down, it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't codify in a few sentences, here's the culture that we want and we aspire to be, then something different is going to grow up, and it may not be as flattering as you wish it were.
And that is the perfect point to end on, because we have a worksheet that accompanies this, and you can take this worksheet and put it to use in your own business. And it's exactly like what Pete said. It's got the actions and the beliefs to create those experiences that drive the culture that you want. And so if you're participating in this live event, you can find that over in this sidebar. Let me share that with you now. And if you're watching this on demand, you'll find a button below the video where you can download this very same worksheet. So that's it. So thank you so much, Pete, for joining us for our very first Pro Power Talk. We hope that you found this information to be valuable, to be inspiring, to use in your everyday practices. And Pete, we didn't even touch on how it impacts your personal brand, because you can take this exact same information and apply it to you as a leader, and how others perceive you, how your teammates perceive you. And this worksheet is the exact same there. So I hate that we didn't touch upon that. But
Julie, we'll talk about that when we get to development, and we'll talk about our leadership legacy. And that'll be exactly the point you just made.
Okay, fantastic. Well, super. So thank you again, and we hope you have a fantastic day. And thanks so much for joining us on Pro. Bye.
Bye.